I just wanted to maybe explain why it is that I don't spend most of my time on the channel prognosticating about the flow of current events. For one thing, the past year has been extremely momentous in a lot of respects, and we're going through really, really, really difficult times. And my natural response to things like this is I understand that I don't know all that much. I certainly don't know anything important for you to know about daily, events, what the latest thing to happen in the COVID crisis is or anything like that. And I think that the events of the past year in particular have been momentous enough that really it's not a bad response to simply be silent and to contemplate. And I guess I would encourage you to do the same by not listening to the flow of constant commentary about every little thing related to it. This is the only way to give yourself space to be able to figure out what this means to you, how it impacts you, and what you should do about it, and what you should do with others about it, and all of that. But this constant noise, this constant drumbeat of people who say they're smart enough to figure out the meaning of some of this is designed to keep you watching. This channel, I hope, is giving you background information that can help you think about things like this for yourself. And so, this is what I find to be more important, right? This is why I'm a political theorist, is because by taking that longer view of history, of the development of political thought, we can hopefully think more clearly. We can think better about whatever is happening. So I just want to say it's not out of indifference that I don't pronounce on things like this very often. It's out of kind of the opposite, a profound impact that I know is happening to people all over the world, and it really seems to trivialize it to talk endlessly about whatever the latest ramification and permutation is. So this is why, I stay silent most of the time. And when I do discuss things like this, it is from the longer view. So today, though, we're going to talk a little bit about what happens in Chapter 8 of Charles Taylor's Malaise and Modernity. And in this chapter, among other things, Taylor explains, or gives his explanation anyway, for why it is that it's so hard for us in the modern world to focus on the environment and provide good solutions to environmental problems, even though one might say it's the most crucial thing of all, because we cannot, we certainly cannot live without it. He says, this culture, meaning the Western world, I think, but you can expand that to much of the globe to the extent that it has been touched by this culture, has seen a many-faceted movement that one could call subjectivation. That is, things center more and more on the subject and in a host of ways. Things that were once settled by some external reality, traditional law, say, or nature, are now referred to our choice. So subjectivation means that everything becomes a matter of our choice and our perspective. And he's saying that over the course of time, our consciousness of this external reality has become weaker. It seems like it's an extension of ourselves. And Taylor, in this chapter, wants to remind us that authenticity does not have to mean this sort of narcissistic dwelling within ourselves to the extent that the external world falls away. And in fact, true authenticity deals with actually grappling with the fact of externalities. He does this by making a distinction. He says there are two importantly different facets to this movement of subjectivation. One concerning the manner and the other concerning the matter or content of action. Okay, so the manner he defines as this has to be my orientation. In other words, our manner of authenticity insists that whatever it is that we're doing has to come from us, has to be my orientation, not someone else's imposed upon me, in other words. It has to come from me. So it can't come from natural law, let's say, or the church, or God, or, aristocratic authority. In modernity, it's supposed to come from me, okay? Which could just mean that it is I who make the decision by using my judgment rather than having it imposed upon me. And I think that Taylor is positive about that, right? Like if that's where it went, Taylor would say good on modernity, because it is a freeing move, right? To be able to shuck off maybe illegitimate or only partially legitimate sources of authority and to take that judgment on for ourselves. But the problem comes in that we apply this subjectivation to also the matter or content that we choose. Okay, so he says, but this doesn't mean that on another level, the content that we choose must be self-referential, that my goals must express or fulfill my desires or aspirations as against something that stands beyond these. Okay, I can find fulfillment in God or a political cause or tending the earth. Indeed, the argument above suggests that we will find genuine fulfillment only in something like this. That is the previous argument that he's made. So we have made the mistake of saying, no, I cannot find my fulfillment in God or political cause or tending the earth. I must find my fulfillment in my own desires and aspirations, which are somehow separate from these. And so even if I choose to embrace these, it's truly just an expression of my own creative self, okay? And this is especially important when it comes to the point about the earth, because he says that one legitimate way of finding fulfillment is tending the earth. Now, what I've learned over the past few years from studying this a little bit, maybe through Wendell Berry as well as other thinkers, is that, the more that a person tends the earth, that is, grows things that they need to live on and that other people need to live on, the more they become intimately, palpably aware of the existence of this other thing, right? In a way, this is partly, I think, what Jakob Hanschu was discussing with me when we conversed last time about this idea of new materialism, right? The idea that the rest of the world, the materials external to us, they have not only what we assign to them as far as meaning and purpose, but they have their own existence. And the reason maybe why new materialism is even new or necessary is because of what Charles Taylor is talking about, where we have become so subjective as to not be able to really perceive or really fully imbibe the truth of an external world. So then nature is seen as something that we can manipulate. It's instrumental. We can manipulate it for our purposes. It becomes part of our creative endeavor, so to speak, and we can do whatever we want to. And of course, the problem for the environment is, and this is farming is a microcosm of this, when you do whatever you want to with it, it does other things back at you, right? As if to say, you know what, like you can keep doing that, but I'm going to stop feeding you after a while. I'm just not going to go along with this. Like we see this going on more and more all over the world. The environment, not to personify it, but it is sort of pushing back, you might say. It's resisting. It's not resisting maybe in a conscious way, but basically because it's an other thing, right? That we don't have complete control over, but we think we do. And this is a modern mythology that comes along with the Enlightenment. So these are some points that Taylor makes. And again, I think I mentioned last time I talked about this book, Taylor doesn't talk very openly about the effect of capitalism, and maybe particularly consumer capitalism, but I think you can factor that in, and it makes his point even more meaningful. He says we've left behind the old order with its established meanings from which to draw, such as religion, such as natural law, such as authority of superiors in the hierarchy, in the great chain of being. He says we must now all be original, and this originality must come from us. Okay, that's what we think. So we are to create our own worlds, and this is especially true, he says, of the artist. So he spends time on the artist. I think partly because the artist has become like a type for us, right? Like in a way, the ideal is that we are all artists, that we create. And, social media and technology have made this sort of, I would call it a dream. It's an illusion, but, this illusion that we can all be creative and artistic has made it even more believable. But Taylor says this is a mistake, okay? That the mistake is that we must create on an entirely internal self-referential basis, okay? And I would just add, again, that part of the reason why we make this mistake is because not only social media encourages us to think that we can do this, but consumer capitalism definitely encourages it in, saying to us, you can be an original, you can express yourself, your authentic self, through purchasing this and that and this and that. I don't need to go into it, right? But the truth is, and this is another thing I just kind of want to add into this analysis a little bit more strongly. Whereas I think Taylor kind of accepts, at least for the purpose of argument, that we can create independently in self-referential way and express ourselves, even though he says that that basically amounts to trivialization, right? But which is true, like our culture has become more trivial and ourselves have become more trivial as a result of this, desire to find the entire world inside ourselves. But also, in recalling Jungian psychology, which I've studied up on a bit, my latest book was deriving from Jungian psychology. We don't really achieve originality easily, if at all, because there's no way for us to really fully step back from the tropes, the symbols, the archetypes, and the cultural stories that have been passed down from generation to generation from time immemorial. And so what we see, is that we adopt as our own personalities and ideas things that resonate with us, right? But we don't really know why. And this is dangerous because in our quest for authenticity and self-expression, we glom onto mere mortals or creative endeavors that speak very strongly to us, probably based upon these archetypal urges within us that we don't even know about anymore. We don't really we're not conscious of them. We glom on to figures, whether it's presidents or whether it's, Marvel heroes or Naruto or whatever it is. We see these stories and these figures are very reminiscent of ideals and types that go back to human prehistory even, right? But we don't understand that or know that. So we do this rather ignorantly. And this is a part of the problem that I would just add into Taylor's analysis, that if we understood the human mind well enough, we would know that originality or authenticity in the way that we have formulated it is impossible and not the point. And that, thinking of these types of urges, ideals, archetypes more consciously would help us to achieve truer authenticity, because we would know who we are better instead of being led around by the nose by those ideologies and consumer messages that just keep us going because they resonate so deeply and they stir up in us these outsized desires. So the larger point that he makes, and this will relate back to the natural world again, is that in our needless and futile subjectivation of matter or content, we ignore external realities that exist and to which we could identify, such as the natural world. And he reminds us that the Romantics didn't make this. This is a painting by William Blake. The Romantics did not make this mistake. In their quest for creativity and authenticity, they assumed and they needed this relationship, this rather mystical relationship between humans and the larger natural world. Taylor says, just because we no longer believe in the doctrines of the great chain of being, we don't need to see ourselves as set in a universe that we can consider simply as a source of raw materials for our projects. We may still need to see ourselves as part of a larger order that can make claims on us. And he makes a point of saying that the natural world can make claims on us. In other words, it's a two-way relationship. And because of the way we think, it's only one way in our minds. And so we are harming something, right, that we depend on for our lives. Indeed, he says this latter would be thought of as urgent, right? The environmental concerns, nature. It would greatly help to stave off ecological disaster if we could recover a sense of the demand that our natural surroundings and wilderness makes on us. This, by the way, is a picture of the latest forest fires in Colorado. Wildfires that swept through Colorado not that long ago and got closer to Denver, as I understand it, than in a long time, if ever. I'll leave you with this quote, which appears at the end of the chapter. He says, if authenticity is being true to ourselves, is recovering the sentiment of our own existence, then perhaps we can only achieve it integrally if we recognize that this sentiment connects us to a wider whole. It was perhaps not an accident that in the Romantic period, the self-feeling and the feeling of belonging to nature were linked. And so he reminds us of Rousseau again, whose notion of authenticity he is not refuting because he thinks it's closer to what it should have been. And it shows us perhaps where we made our mistake. I'll finish up this book next time and hopefully let you know where I'm headed next as well.